I am Mateo, a man in my mid-40s, caught somewhere between the youthful ambition that once defined me and the weight of expectations that have followed me throughout my life. I work as a senior executive at a prominent tech company, a position that once made me feel proud. A place where I could use my skills in strategic planning and team management to create something meaningful. In my office, I was respected, and my team looked up to me. They sought my advice and trusted my direction. My success, by all accounts, was undeniable. But the strange truth is that while I was excelling at work, at home, I felt invisible. At home, I was not the successful, confident executive. I was just Mateo, the man who had failed to live up to the expectations of those closest to him. I have a wife, Alice, who has stood by me for years. But in her eyes, there was always an undercurrent of disappointment. I know she loved me, but there was this unspoken pressure, the weight of her unfulfilled dreams that seemed to hover over everything. Alice had a different vision for our life, one where I was more present, more grounded, more like the men we grew up with. And then there were the kids, two wonderful children. Both in their late teens now, they adored me. But their lives were shaped more by the images of the perfect family that we saw on social media, and less by the complexities of a real-life, middle-class existence. They wanted stability, certainty, and I couldn't help but wonder if my job, a job that required long hours, constant travel, and high levels of stress, was ever really worth it to them. The real tension, though, came from my extended family. I was often compared to my younger brother, Thomas, who had settled into a traditional career working in finance. Climbing the corporate ladder in a predictable way, he had a stable family, a mortgage on a home that didn't require him to leave for days on end, and a life that, by all accounts, seemed more normal. Every time the family gathered, I could feel the sting of their quiet judgments. "Why can't you be more like Thomas?" they would ask. As if the simple fact of his normalcy made him a better person. "Why don't you just settle down? Mateo, you don't need to be such a big shot at work." It wasn't just the comments. It was the looks, the tone of their voices, the subtle dismissals that told me that no matter how much I achieved in my career, I would never be seen as successful by their standards. I could bring home accolades, close multi-million-dollar deals, and lead a team to success, but none of that mattered. In their eyes, I was still the man who didn't quite fit in. I wasn't as stable, as predictable, as reliable as my younger brother. The pressure to be someone I wasn't, to conform to the expectations of my family, was suffocating. I often found myself questioning my choices. Was it worth it? Was I chasing something I would never truly obtain? And the more I questioned, the more I felt that my real achievements, the ones that mattered to me, were slipping away unnoticed. The truth was, while the corporate world might have seen me as a leader, my own family saw me as just another man struggling for validation. The accolades and accomplishments that made me feel successful at work seemed to be irrelevant at home. I was torn between two worlds, one that admired me for my work and one that continually compared me to others, leaving me feeling small, overlooked, and unappreciated. At the end of the day, I wasn't sure who I was anymore, a successful executive, or just a man yearning for recognition in a place where it seemed unattainable. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when everything I thought I knew about my life, about family, and about myself, began to unravel. The day had started like any other, but little did I know, I was about to experience one of the most painful and shocking moments of my life. My younger brother, Thomas, was getting married, and the whole family had gathered to celebrate. The ceremony was held at a grand estate in Malibu, the kind of location that spoke volumes about the wealth and status they had accumulated over the years. The venue was breathtaking, the kind of place you'd expect for a wedding where the bride's gown cost more than my annual salary. The guest list alone was a testament to Thomas's stature. Over 300 guests, ranging from wealthy business associates to distant cousins I hadn't seen in years, were invited. As I walked through the front door, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride for him. It wasn't just the wedding that stood out. It was the way everyone seemed to treat him with such reverence, like he was already a king in his own right. I'd spent years building a career that I hoped would eventually earn me that kind of respect, but seeing it bestowed upon Thomas so effortlessly brought something uncomfortable to the surface. I greeted the guests, made polite small talk, and tried to blend into the background. As the night wore on, I noticed something strange. Alice, my wife, had been acting distant. Her eyes wandered, not in a way that suggested curiosity, but with a look I couldn't quite place. There was a slight tightness in her smile when she spoke to me, as if something was weighing on her mind. But it wasn't until the reception, just before dinner, that I would find out what that something was. In the middle of the evening, as the music played and the lights glittered across the ballroom, the wedding planner called everyone's attention for a special announcement. I stood in the back, sipping my drink, oblivious to what was about to happen, and then, with a wide, rehearsed smile, the wedding planner announced, "I would like to thank all the close family and friends who made this evening so special. Now, before we dive into the delicious dinner and festivities, I want to take a moment to recognize a special group of people, the ones who have been the most instrumental in our lives." I expected a typical, heartfelt mention of the parents, perhaps a toast to the newlyweds, but then the words I heard next cut through the air like a knife. The couple would like to thank those who have supported them financially in making this wedding a reality, specifically the contributions made by Thomas's brother, Mateo. The room went silent. All eyes turned to me, and for a brief moment, I thought I had misheard, but there it was, the wedding planner's gaze fixed on me, with a faint smirk that I didn't quite understand. We could not have made this day possible without Mateo's generous financial contribution, she continued, raising her glass. Not everyone has a brother willing to help out so much. Thanks to Mateo, we were able to secure the venue, the catering, and even the photographer's services. A real lifesaver. I stood frozen, my mind racing. Was she joking? A quick glance at Thomas's face told me it wasn't a joke. He smiled at me, but there was no warmth in it, just the cold calculation of someone who had manipulated a situation for their own gain. I didn't know how to respond. The truth was, I had indeed lent them a significant amount of money, a sum close to $150. $10 to cover the costs of the wedding when Thomas had come to me a few months ago. Pleading for help, I had agreed to help out, thinking it was family. After all, Thomas was my brother, and I wanted him to have the perfect wedding. But I never expected to be publicly called out like this, to be reduced to a mere financial benefactor in front of hundreds of people who barely knew me. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation, but it wasn't just the public spectacle. It was the realization that I had been used, that I had been taken advantage of without even knowing it. The money I had lent them was never meant to be acknowledged like this. It was a gesture of love, not a transaction to be flaunted in front of an audience. But that's exactly what it had become, just another example of how Thomas, and everyone else in the family, saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. I could feel the tightness in my chest, the way my pulse quickened, but I couldn't even find the words to express how hurt I felt. My eyes shifted to Alice, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but I saw nothing but a mixture of guilt and resignation on her face. She knew. She had known the truth about how much I had sacrificed to make this day happen for them, and yet she said nothing. The evening continued, but it felt like I was walking through a fog. The air in the ballroom grew heavy, the laughter and music now distant. Like I was watching someone else's life unfold. I wanted to confront Thomas, to demand an explanation for this humiliation. But I didn't. I couldn't. The hurt was too deep. The realization that I had been taken advantage of, that my own family had used me without a second thought, left me numb. That night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of it all settled in. I had been played. The money, the gifts, the effort I had given, everything, only to be publicly cast aside as if I were a mere pawn in their game. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead, all I could do was lie there, feeling more alone than ever before. This wasn't just a betrayal of money, it was a betrayal of trust, of family, of everything I had believed in, and as I closed my eyes, I couldn't help but wonder, had I been blind all this time? Had I been fooling myself into thinking that family meant anything more than a convenient relationship based on need? The minutes after the wedding planner's words felt like an eternity, each second dragging longer than the last. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. The applause, the cheers, the clinking of glasses, it all blurred into white noise. Like I was in a dream. In that moment, I felt as though I were outside my own body, disconnected from the scene unfolding before me. The cold air from the air conditioning felt like an assault on my skin, making me shiver despite the warmth of the room. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, a rapid drum that echoed in my ears, drowning out everything else. I hadn't moved. My feet were rooted to the ground, as though I were a statue of my own making. Everyone was still watching me. Thomas, his bride, the wedding guests, all of them, some with smiles, some with raised eyebrows. But no one looked at me with the warmth I had hoped for. I had been exposed in a way I never imagined possible. I had been used, taken advantage of. I couldn't bring myself to face any of them. Not yet. Not until I had figured out what to do with this raw, gnawing hurt inside of me. I could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up my neck, my cheeks burning with humiliation. I wanted to scream, to tell them all how much they had hurt me, how I had been the one to sacrifice my own financial security to make this day possible. I had been the one to lend them money when no one else would, the one who had made sure everything went smoothly, only to be reduced to nothing more than a checkbook, a tool for their convenience. My own family had stripped me of everything: my pride, my dignity, my sense of worth. But I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I turned and walked away, my feet dragging as I made my way out of the reception hall. I passed by the guests without acknowledging them, feeling the weight of their gaze on my back. I didn't care. I didn't want to be there anymore. All I wanted was to escape, to run far away from the person I had become in their eyes. I wasn't Matteo, the successful executive, anymore. I was just Matteo the fool. When I reached the parking lot, I stood by my car for a few moments, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were shaking as I gripped the door handle. The tears were right there, threatening to spill over, but I refused to let them. I had spent my entire life building up a facade of strength, of being the dependable one, the one who always took care of everyone else. But in that moment, I felt like the weakest person in the world. My family, the people who were supposed to lift me up, had torn me down. I didn't go back inside. I couldn't. I started the car and drove away. My mind a blur of confusion and anger. The road seemed to stretch on forever, each mile only deepening the emptiness inside me. I didn't even know where I was going. Just away from everything that had just shattered in front of me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of Alice's steady breathing beside me. I could hear her soft exhale, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. My mind kept replaying the events of the evening over and over again, like a broken record. The way the wedding planner had singled me out, the look of satisfaction on Thomas's face, the cold indifference of my family. It was all too much. But what hurt more than anything was the realization that I had always been here for them. I had always been the one to sacrificing my time, my energy, my money. I had given everything for them, and what had I gotten in return? Nothing. No recognition, no appreciation. Just betrayal. I kept thinking back to the countless times I had been overlooked, dismissed, and used. The subtle comments from my family, the looks of disappointment in their eyes when I chose a career that required long hours and travel, the whispers behind my back when I wasn't around, the way they'd compare me to Thomas, as if he was the golden child and I was the one who couldn't quite get it together. I had always been the one to bend, to try harder, to give more, and yet it was never enough. I couldn't help but wonder, why had I put up with it for so long? Why had I let them treat me this way? I had always thought that family was supposed to support you, that they were supposed to be the ones who understood you the most. But instead, they had turned me into a tool, a means to an end, and I had let it happen. I had let them take advantage of me, take my kindness for weakness, and now I had nothing to show for it, not even respect. As the hours dragged on, the pain of what had happened began to turn into something else, something colder, harder, anger, rage. How could they do this to me? How could I have been so blind? I knew what I had to do next. I had to cut ties. No more money. No more support. No more bending over backwards for people who only saw me as a resource. I had already made that decision before the night was over. I would never be used like this again. I wouldn't be the person they could always count on, the one they could manipulate for their own gain. I wasn't a fool anymore. The next morning, I sat down at the kitchen table, my phone in hand. Alice was already up, pouring coffee, her face etched with concern. She had seen the storm in my eyes the night before and knew I hadn't returned home the same person. "I'm done," I said, the words coming out of my mouth before I even fully processed them. "I'm cutting them off. No more money, no more support, no more anything." Alice didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. She had always known what I had been sacrificing for the sake of family, but she had never pushed me to stop. Now, it seemed like I had reached my breaking point. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly, sitting down beside me. "I know it's hard, but I didn't let her finish. I'm sure," I said, my voice firm. "They've crossed the line, and this time, I'm not going to let them do it again. I've spent too many years giving them everything I had, and for what?" For a moment, there was silence, but this time, it felt different. It felt like I was finally speaking the truth. A week had passed since the wedding, and I still couldn't shake the sting of betrayal. The anger simmered inside me like a pot on the verge of boiling over, each day feeling longer than the last. the weight of my family's expectations, the subtle judgments, the unsaid criticisms pressed down on me with an unbearable force. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape them. It was like I was suffocating in the suffocating cocoon of their indifference. I was no longer the man I used to be. The self-assured, confident executive had been replaced with a hollow version of myself, a man consumed by hurt and confusion. But something inside me shifted. I was done wallowing in the shadow of my family's expectations. I needed to do something not out of anger, but out of a desire to prove something to myself. I wasn't a tool for them to use and discard. I wasn't a source of endless financial support. I had to find my voice. And so, I decided it was time to take action. In the days leading up to this decision, I had been reflecting on my career, on the choices I had made, and the sacrifices I had given up in the name of loyalty, both to my family and to the company I had worked for. During my time at the company, I had kept meticulous records. It was something I had always done, keeping track of meetings, conversations, financial figures, anything that could potentially come in handy one day. I wasn't naive. I knew the way the corporate world worked, and I knew how to protect myself. I had recorded everything from strategic planning sessions to one-on-one meetings with my team. I had taken notes on every financial discrepancy, every questionable decision made by the higher-ups, and the subtle ways in which they were manipulating the numbers to make things appear better than they were. It had become increasingly clear that the company's management had been making reckless decisions under the guise of optimization and growth. I had tried to speak up about the financial cuts, the layoffs, the tight budgets, but every time, I had been shut down, ignored, or dismissed. But now, with all the information at my disposal, it was time to speak the truth. I had proof that the company was lying about its performance, about its goals, about its future. The 22% drop in performance that had cost me my job wasn't due to my so-called incompetence. It was the result of the company's greed and mismanagement. They had intentionally sabotaged their own success in order to fatten their pockets while laying off employees who had no idea what was really going on behind the scenes. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I couldn't let them get away with this. But I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing it for everyone who had been wronged, for all the people whose careers and lives had been ruined because of corporate greed. I sent an email to the CEO and the board, attached with the recordings and documents that laid out the truth. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't hide behind politeness. I called them out for what they had done and how they had manipulated not only me but everyone in the company. I made it clear that I was prepared to go public with this information if they didn't take immediate action. That was when I realized something. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I just needed to stand up for what was right. For the first time in a long while, I felt something resembling control over my own narrative, control over my own life. The next morning, Alice and I had a long conversation about the future. I hadn't told her about the email I had sent, about the war I had just declared on my former company. But she could see it in my eyes. There was a spark there that hadn't been there before. She didn't ask any questions. She didn't need to. She simply gave me a nod of understanding. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I'm with you." But what happened next would change everything. It was the following Sunday. Thomas and his bride had invited the family over for a small brunch to smooth things over after the wedding fiasco. I hadn't planned to go. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face them, to pretend that everything was fine. But something urged me to go. Maybe it was because I hadn't completely processed the hurt yet. Or maybe it was because, deep down, I still wanted to be part of the family I had tried so hard to please. I arrived at the house, my mind still swirling with everything that had transpired in the past week. Alice, as always, tried to keep the peace, but as we entered the house, I could already sense the awkwardness in the air. The tension was thick, palpable, hanging over the room like an uncomfortable fog. I could tell that no one had forgotten the wedding incident. The conversation started innocently enough small talk, polite chatter, but it wasn't long before the cracks began to show. Thomas and his bride, Emily, were sitting at the head of the table, exchanging smug glances as if they were enjoying some private joke. I couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't going to sit there and pretend. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, cutting through the murmur of the conversation. "I need to say something," I said, my voice steady. Though the anger still simmered beneath the surface, everyone fell silent, turning their attention to me. "I don't know what you all think of me," I continued, "but I'm done. I'm done being the one you always go to when you need something. I'm done pretending that I don't know how you've been using me, how you've been using my money, my time, and my efforts to make your lives easier while I get nothing in return." The room was still. No one spoke. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I pushed forward. "I've given you everything. Thomas and Emily. I've been nothing but supportive, but all I've ever gotten in return is disrespect." Before anyone could respond, my 9-year-old son, Ethan, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, suddenly stood up. His small voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Dad's not lying," he said. "I overheard them talking the other day. Uncle Thomas said that he didn't care if Dad had to struggle, as long as he could have the wedding he wanted." The room gasped. I looked at Ethan, my heart swelling with a mix of pride and disbelief. He had overheard that conversation. Thomas and Emily went pale. Their smiles faltered, their eyes darting nervously around the room. The truth had been exposed. They hadn't counted on Ethan hearing anything, let alone revealing it to everyone. Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came out. Emily, too, seemed to have lost the ability to speak. Their facade crumbled, and for the first time, I saw them for what they truly were. As the silence stretched, my family looked between us, my son and me, Thomas and Emily, and each other as the weight of what had been exposed sank in. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It wasn't about money. It was about respect, about the truth being laid bare for everyone to see. And in that moment, I realized that I had finally been seen. I had spent days contemplating what to do, going over the evidence I had gathered, and deciding how best to confront those who had wronged me. The anger I had felt in the days following my firing had simmered into something else, something sharper, more purposeful. I had the truth now, and the truth had a power that could no longer be ignored. I called a meeting with the CEO, scheduling it as formally as I would any other meeting. I knew this moment would either be my redemption or my downfall, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't the broken man I had been just a week ago. This wasn't the same Mateo who had been fired without explanation. This wasn't the same man who had stood quietly in that sterile office, silently taking the blame for a company's failures. No. This time, I walked into that boardroom as someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The room was still when I entered, the air thick with anticipation. The CEO, the CFO, and several other senior executives were present. They looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, as though they hadn't yet decided how to treat me, whether I was a disgruntled former employee or someone with the power to change the game. I didn't waste any time. "Here are the numbers," I said, my voice firm As I laid out the recordings, the emails, and the financial reports in front of them, the weight of the papers felt symbolic, as though each page carried the truth that had been hidden for far too long. The CEO's eyes flickered to the documents but quickly darted away. Unable to face the evidence, his face turned pale as he realized what I was about to do. His hands, previously resting on the table, shifted nervously. His breath quickened. The others around the table shifted uncomfortably, as if they, too, could feel the tension rising. But I didn't stop. I wasn't here to appease them. I was here to expose the truth. This company has been hiding its failures behind the backs of employees like me. I continued. You chose to fire me, but it was your mismanagement, your greed, and your lack of foresight that led to this. I paused for a moment, letting the words hang in the air. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken guilt. The CEO opened his mouth, as if to say something, but no words came out. I could see him struggling, trying to formulate an excuse, but none would suffice. His usual air of confidence had disappeared, replaced by a look of desperation. I don't need this job, I said, my voice unwavering, louder than I had ever spoken in that room. But I do need to respect myself, and I need you to understand that you can't treat people like they're disposable. I've given this company everything I had. I've worked late nights, sacrificed time with my family, and even put my own health on the line, all in the name of your bottom line. But now, I see the truth. You've been playing a game at the expense of people's lives. Well, I'm done playing by your rules. I stood there for a moment, watching their faces. The CFO, once so confident in his numbers, now shifted nervously in his seat. The others exchanged looks, guilty, surprised, but not necessarily remorseful. They were cornered, caught in a web they had spun themselves, and they knew it. But the most telling moment was the CEO's face. The arrogant, untouchable CEO who had always looked at me as a cog in the machine. Someone to be discarded when no longer useful was now struggling to maintain control. He was the one who had failed. But now, he was the one on the defensive. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need their hollow words. What I needed, what I had to prove to myself, was that I had the power to walk away. I had the power to stand up for myself and draw a line in the sand. No more would I allow myself to be treated as insignificant. No more would I let them use me as a pawn in their game of profits and power. I'm walking away from this, I said, letting the words sink in. Not because you fired me, but because I've realized something. My value isn't defined by your company or your perception of me. It's defined by me, and I refuse to be part of a system that doesn't respect people for their worth. I'm not a tool for your ambitions anymore. The CEO opened his mouth again, but still, nothing came out. His eyes shifted between me and the papers on the table, his mind clearly racing to find a way to salvage the situation. But it was too late. The truth had been spoken. The damage had been done. I stood up, leaving the papers where they were, and walked toward the door. As my hand touched the handle, I paused and turned around. I want you to remember this moment, I said, my voice steady, because this is the moment you lost me, and everyone else like me. I won't be the one who bends for you anymore. I won't be the one to sacrifice myself for a company that doesn't care about anything but its bottom line. And with that, I left. I walked out of that room not just with my dignity restored, but with something much more important, my sense of self, the freedom to make my own decisions, to choose my own path, and to never let anyone define my worth again. A few days later, I received a call from the CEO's office. They wanted to discuss the situation further, to possibly negotiate some terms or find a way to smooth things over. But I knew what that was: an attempt to maintain control, to salvage whatever remained of their reputation. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I had already made my decision, and for the first time in years, I was living life on my own terms. At home, Alice was waiting for me. Her eyes met mine with a look of understanding. She didn't need to ask how the meeting had gone. She could see it in my face. "You did it, didn't you?" she asked softly. I nodded, a small, genuine smile breaking through. "I did," I said, "and I'll never let anyone treat me like that again. Not my family, not my company, not anyone." It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the job. It was about the principle, the need to respect myself and set clear boundaries. I had found my voice again, and this time, no one was going to take it from me. The weeks that followed weren't easy. There were still people in my life who didn't understand, who tried to convince me to come back, to accept the terms they offered. But I stood firm, slowly. I began to rebuild my career, my family, my sense of self, and with each step, I became more sure of one thing: I was finally in control of my future. In the weeks that followed, I began the slow process of rebuilding my life, not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually. There were still difficult days, moments where the weight of the past tried to pull me back into old patterns of thinking. But with each passing day, I became more grounded in who I was becoming. Alice, my wife, and the kids stood by me through it all. We made difficult decisions together, restructured our lives, and faced the financial storm we'd been swept into head-on. It wasn't easy, but we weathered it as a family. And in those quiet, intimate moments, when we shared meals and laughter despite everything, I realized that the chaos had somehow brought us closer. But it wasn't just our finances that were rebuilding. It was me. There was a shift inside me, a realization that changed everything. I no longer sought validation from anyone. I no longer sought to be seen through the lens of my family's expectations or my company's demands. For so long, I had measured my worth by what others thought of me, by how much I could provide, how well I could perform, how much I could sacrifice for others. But now, I understood something profound. I was enough, just as I was. I had spent years running on empty, chasing approval that was always just out of reach. I had allowed myself to be defined by the roles I played: son, employee, provider. But in the end, those labels were hollow. I realized that the real value of a person isn't tied to their job, their paycheck, or the opinions of others. It comes from within. It comes from being true to yourself, from knowing your own worth, and from standing firm in your boundaries, regardless of the pressure to conform. In the midst of this transformation, I asked myself, what was I truly living for? Was I living to meet the expectations of others, or was I living for myself for too long? I had lived in a way that wasn't authentic to who I was. I had spent so much time worrying about what others thought of me, always hoping for approval, always afraid of disappointing my family or letting down my boss. But now, I understood that I couldn't continue living like that. I couldn't sacrifice my happiness and my peace of mind for the sake of others' expectations. I learned to forgive myself for the mistakes I had made, for the times I had allowed myself to be mistreated, and for the moments I had stayed silent when I should have spoken up. Forgiveness wasn't just about letting others off the hook. It was about releasing myself from the weight of resentment, from the burden of carrying other people's judgments. It was a gift I gave to myself. And yet, as I embraced this new chapter, I found myself grappling with a question that lingered in the back of my mind. What about the people I had left behind? What about the family that had treated me with indifference for so long? Was it too late for them to change? Too late for them to see me for who I truly was? Could I find a way to forgive them? Not for their sake, but for my own peace of mind. Forgiveness is a powerful thing, but it's not always easy. The hardest part is realizing that forgiveness doesn't mean condoning the hurt or forgetting the pain. It means letting go of the hold that pain has on you. It means freeing yourself from the grip of resentment, even if the other person never acknowledges their wrongs. And so, I move forward with the understanding that my worth is not dependent on my family's recognition, my boss's approval, or anyone else's expectations. I am enough as I am. I no longer seek validation outside of myself. I am no longer defined by the roles I play or the titles I hold. I define myself, but this journey is not just mine. It's one that I share with everyone who has ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or lost. And so, I ask you, the reader, what defines your worth? Is it your job, your relationships, or your ability to stand up for what you believe in, even when everything else is falling apart? What happens when you stop living for others and start living for yourself? When you stop chasing validation and start embracing your own truth? The answers are different for everyone, but one thing is clear. Your worth is not something that can be measured by external factors. It is something that comes from within something that only you can define. So, I leave you with this question. What will you choose to live for?